Theo Gremminger and I are back with bold predictions for Fantasy Football Week 8, as well as the entire season. We've got a lot coming at you today. A lot of movement in the NFL. We got players moving like DeAndre Hopkins. How does that affect Kansas City Chiefs? Maybe Hopkins, maybe other weapons affected. You've got Jameis Winston, now the starting quarterback in Cleveland. How does that affect the wide receivers, the running backs? We have a bold prediction about a particular wide receiver in Cleveland. And, of course, the team with the most upheaval, San Francisco. We have a bold prediction about the 49ers. Off we go, Theo, and we'll start right there. We'll start with the 49ers. We'll start with George Kittle. George Kittle is a monster. He is not only poised to be the number one tight end in fantasy. That's not bold to say, oh, George Kittle's going to be the number one tight end in fantasy. Yeah, we know that. Okay, we know that. Bowers is the only other tight end that even has a chance to compete with George Kittle this year in the fantasy points department. But when I look back at past fantasy points scoring, there's a particular season that jumps out. The 2020 Travis Kelce season, a tight end goes over 20 fantasy points per game. That's hard to do. That is incredibly hard to do. He had to go over 1,300 receiving yards, well into the double-digit touchdowns. From this point forward, Week 8 onward, George Kittle will be the first tight end since Travis Kelce to score 20-plus fantasy points per game.
I love it, and I think you're spot on. And he has 3 20-point weeks already this season, and Kittle's fully healthy. Usually you get to this point of the season, and it's like Kittle's bothered by this injury or this injury or this injury, and he's just playing through it because the guy's a warrior. But everything is shaping up for just the George Kittle massive spike week after massive spike week. You know, obviously, Brandon Ayuk done for the year. Deebo Samuel probably doesn't play this week. Maybe they're breaking in a Ricky Pearsall. Maybe it's a Juwan Jennings, rest of the season he produces. Any way you want to cut it, the one constant in San Francisco moving forward is George Kittle.
So George Kittle, by the way, we go all the way back to the last time he was this healthy was when? Anyone know? Anyone know? Anyone know? Anyone know? Anyone know? Anyone know? 2018. 2018, George Kittle had 1,377 receiving yards with a 15.8 yards per reception. That is elite alpha wide receiver numbers. That's what he's capable of because he's an incredible athlete. He runs a 4.5. He has a 90th percentile burst score, 90th percentile agility score on playerprofiler.com. He is a yards after the catch monster. It's just that season he didn't get the touchdown equity. Now, with Brandon Ayuk, with the torn ACL, you have Deebo Samuel suffering from pneumonia. He's going to be getting the touchdown looks. He's going to be getting the looks between the 20s. He's going to be getting the looks everywhere. This is how you get peak Travis Kelce this year. George Kittle, if you drafted him and just said, I don't care about the target competition, I'm drafting the talent, you win.
6 straight seasons where he's finished at least tight end 6 or better. Matt, I'm with you. He's the tight end 1 overall this season. And I got to talk about a prediction that's actually not fun to talk about, but I'm seeing a lot of sort of hype this week that this is going to be a big bounce back week. We're finally going to get Sam LaPorta from last year. No Jameson Williams, fewer mouths to feed in the Detroit passing game. I actually think this is going to be another disappointing Sam LaPorta week. The targets simply are not there. This is a player who had 120 targets plus as a rookie. Unbelievable rookie season, gave us a tight end 1 overall season, was drafted as a tight end 1 in ADP. I was head over heels for Sam LaPorta last year during the ascension. And now, Matt, the targets are completely disappeared. 17 total targets this year. I don't have any confidence in Sam LaPorta. I think he's going to finish somewhere around tight end 11, tight end 12. I think he will not finish inside the top 10 at the position. Massive, massive ADP bust. Still retains a lot of dynasty value because we know he's a good football player, but this year's production, incredibly, incredibly disappointing and sort of a cautionary tale, Matt. I know you've made the point that a second-year tight end that sort of was a rocket ship last year, should not have been the tight end one overall this past summer in tight end ADP. You talked about that a lot. This sort of reinforces your point.
Team pass plays per game for Detroit, 30.6 on playerprofiler.com. That ranks number 21 in the NFL. The problem with Sam LaPorta has nothing to do with Sam LaPorta. It has everything to do with how great this team has played and that they can just run the ball in the second half. So they go from 36 pass plays per game down to 30. Well, guess where those 6 targets that were going to Sam LaPorta have gone? Those are now David Montgomery carries. That's the shift that you've seen in Detroit, and it's not like you're going to see a huge sucking sound coming from the target share for Amon-Ra St. Brown, the number 1. No, where are those targets going to come from? Those targets that get converted into rushing, it's from Sam LaPorta. Sadly, he's just in a difficult structural situation to be a productive tight end.
What is your next one, Matt? What else do you got?
Jameis Winston is now the starting quarterback in Cleveland. What does that mean? You might say, oh, well, Cedric Tillman, he double-digit targets last week. He's got to be the new alpha. Not so fast. Cedric Tillman's a nice player, sure. Elijah Moore has always been an efficient wide receiver. He's always been a big-time target separator. When you go to Player Profiler, you see 2.3 yards of separation at target this year, which ranks number 6th in the NFL. But why are his other metrics so poor? Because Deshaun Watson cannot get out of his own way. Deshaun Watson can't get the ball further than 10 yards downfield. Now Deshaun Watson's no longer a problem. He's no longer a problem for anyone in fantasy football, anywhere. Jameis Winston, what do we know he can do? There's one thing Jameis Winston can do. If he's still in the league, we know he can do one thing. Push the ball down the field. So you have a target separator who earned more targets last week than Jerry Jeudy. He was a dominant college player. He had some efficient seasons even in New York before he ended up in Cleveland. They brought him in for a reason. Elijah Moore puts up a top 20 week, shocks the world, and he is the number 1 waiver pickup next week when waivers run.
It's spicy, but I'll say this, Matt. People should be listening to us when it comes to Cleveland Browns, because we talked about David Njoku, where he was headed on a previous show we did together. So we've been spot on with everything Browns. I don't know which way it's going to go. I think Elijah Moore is as good a bet as any. I agree with you that the Cedric Tillman sort of outburst was sort of the Spencer Rattler, Bub Means corollary, where it was a backup quarterback looks for the wide receiver he's most familiar with. That's not going to be the case with Jameis. I just know that it's going to be a ton of David Njoku, but I do think that there's going to be opportunities for Elijah Moore. This is a guy that years ago, Matt, we were collectively very enthusiastic about.
Yes.
Garrett Wilson happened in New York, but we've seen Elijah Moore put up a 30-point PPR week. We've seen Elijah Moore do it multiple times in a season. Maybe that's with Jameis Winston, it'll also come down to, do they let him play like Jameis? Is this going to be hand the ball off to Nick Chubb, play action to David Njoku, very tight game plan, or are they going to let it rock? And
no, he has to let it rock. It doesn't matter what they're going to let him do. They're 9-point dogs to Baltimore. And Baltimore's defense is particularly leaky against opposing wide receivers. They're top 10 in fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receivers. What's going to happen is they're going to get down double digits, and Jameis is going to be in comeback mode. This is how fantasy points get scored, especially in the second half, and Elijah Moore will be the under-the-radar beneficiary of the Jameis Winston era in Cleveland. Watch it happen.
Yeah, I love it. And David Njoku also will feast. Baltimore has allowed the most tight end 1 performances on the season. So we're looking for sneaky Browns performances in your lineup. Matt, for me, this is one where we saw the Chris Godwin season-ending injury, catastrophic. He was simply one of the best picks you could have made at ADP at the position, sort of almost were like the Derrick Henry of wide receivers, where you drafted him and the sort of returns you're getting. There's a lot of people sort of having a funeral procession for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense, and I'm not one of them, because I do think that there's enough talent behind Chris Godwin and Mike Evans that Baker Mayfield is not going to fall off. Like Baker Mayfield right now is QB2 on the season behind Lamar Jackson. Matt, Baker Mayfield is popping a mid-game Zyn in the middle of the game. The guy's taking in a little bit of nicotine just to stay sharp. About peak Baker Mayfield moment in his career right there. Just goes to show you the confidence level of a guy to just do that on the sidelines. But Baker Mayfield is not going to disappear. And Trey Palmer is going to step right in the Mike Evans role. You're going to get a little bit of Sterling Shepard. You're going to get a lot of Rashad White and Bucky Irving out of the backfield. But the player that I want to focus on, Jalen McMillan. Jalen McMillan is a player that we've been high on for several months here at Player Profiler as a guy you want to stash. I had him in the waiver wire several times over on playerprofiler.com as a guy where, hey, if Chris Godwin or Mike Evans were to go down, then Jalen McMillan would be a must-add player and a player that would go right into our fantasy lineups. Well, now I'm sort of on the spot here because that's exactly what he's going to be. But, Matt, this is a perfect game for him to start out because the Atlanta Falcons have allowed several wide receivers to have very big games against them. They're actually second in the NFL in wide receiver 2 or better performances allowed. I think Jalen McMillan steps right in. Jalen McMillan finishes as a top 20 wide receiver this week, and he's going to be a mainstay in our fantasy lineups for the rest of the season. There's a reason you bid for him last night on the waiver wire. It's because this is a very, very good player. We saw him at Washington, Matt. He led the Washington Huskies in receptions in 2022 alongside Rome Odunze, alongside Jalen Polk. This guy can play, and I think we're going to see it very, very quickly. Top 20 receiver this week against Atlanta.
Yeah, that he missed those games last year at Washington. That's the reason why Jalen Polk was a second-round pick. Had he played, it could have been McMillan as a second-round pick and Jalen Polk as the late-round pick. But Tampa scouts saw what they needed to see with Jalen McMillan, and now Jalen McMillan is stepping into a starting role in Tampa. It's exciting. And why not McMillan, and why not this week? DeAndre Hopkins heading to Kansas City. Why not, right? It just makes too much sense. Makes too much, especially when they lost Juju. We won't hear from Juju again for the rest of his career. I mean, I hope Juju enjoyed that one big game and has that as a lasting memory, because that's all we're going to get from Juju for the rest of time. DeAndre Hopkins is not the player that we saw in Tennessee. This was a demoralized superstar who takes great care of his body. He's going to step right in and start commanding targets. And the under-the-radar beneficiary of this will be Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy was set to be the buy low option of the week in trade. Right? We released a video a couple days ago. Check it out on the Player Profiler YouTube channel where you can see me talking about why Xavier Worthy is such an incredible buy low in all formats right now. Adding DeAndre Hopkins doesn't change this, because we talked about how, we're going to see the 2020 version of Travis Kelce in the 2024 George Kittle. Well, you know who else smashed in 2020? Will Fuller. Will Fuller across the formation from DeAndre Hopkins put up 17.2 fantasy points per game because opposing defenses were shadowing and shifting toward DeAndre Hopkins, providing more room, more space, more deep separation for Will Fuller. And the addition of DeAndre Hopkins is not going to take targets away or opportunities away from Xavier Worthy. These are your starters. And in all those situations where the safeties are going to bite up on DeAndre Hopkins, those are going to be opportunities for Xavier Worthy with double moves on the outside. It's going to make him a more efficient playmaker, especially deep. Look for Xavier Worthy in Week 8 to score on a 50-yard plus touchdown, and for him to be a waiver wire ad as people are dropping him now, which is a mistake. And those of you that traded for him at this particular low point will look like geniuses.
Yeah, and I think that there's a chance that also Xavier Worthy could just get there with touchdowns, where it sounds sort of simplistic, but like you said, Matt, even where it hasn't been the sort of production we want to see with like the high number of targets, we did see a season high 8 targets this past week.
He
And now
4X the next guy.
there you go. And also the guy has 4 touchdowns so far. So he's got 4 touchdowns. He's scored a number of ways. He's a big play threat. And this might be a guy who does it with touchdowns. But now with the addition of DeAndre Hopkins, I think the offense gets better. Yeah, it's Juju's disappears. Travis Kelce takes a big step backwards. DeAndre Hopkins is going to step in and be kind of what he was last year, like a 27-28% target share guy. And Xavier Worthy can absolutely thrive as a big player in that offense. I love the call. For me, I'm going to go back to last year as sort of, oh my God, look what this guy's doing every week type explosiveness player, and that's DeVon Achane. And DeVon Achane, some interesting things happened post-bye week. Post-bye week, we thought maybe DeVon Achane was going to miss a game. He was dealing with a concussion. He played. We thought maybe DeVon Achane was going to take a step back in terms of volume because this was a guy that's absorbed a ton of volume this season, more than we had sort of anticipated this summer, where it was like, hey, he's going to be the highly efficient guy. He's also going to catch some passes. He's still going to break off long runs. It's been like, hey, Mike McDaniel, what are you doing? You're giving DeVon Achane all these touches, even in games that are decided. But that's neither here nor there. The Dolphins' season has been a train wreck, but they get Tua Tagovailoa back this week. And that is going to make a massive difference. And it certainly is a welcome back Tyreek Hill in our lineups. And hopefully let's see Jalen Waddle do the same thing. Those guys have not had a wide receiver 2 finish since week 1 collectively. But to me, the biggest beneficiary of having Tua Tagovailoa come back is going to be DeVon Achane. DeVon Achane is going to score 25-plus PPR points this week against the Arizona Cardinals. Last week, post-bye week, Matt, he had 17 touches. He clearly out-carried Raheem Mostert. Raheem Mostert had 11 touches, and Matt, Raheem Mostert also had a fumble. Raheem Mostert is dealing with injuries himself. So this is the DeVon Achane smash week. I think that Arizona is a team that has certainly not been doing what we thought they'd be doing this year. This is Miami could come out and get an upset win if Tua comes up back looking like he did in week 1. But any way you cut it, DeVon Achane, 25 PPR points. He's going to break off 2 long runs, and he's going to score on a receiving touchdown. Everything's going to be right for DeVon Achane rest of the season. A perfect buy low trade candidate if anyone in your league is a little bit upset at the recent production. I'm going and trying to add DeVon Achane wherever I can.
I agree 100% that quarterback upgrade helps the running back just as much as the wide receivers because there are more sustained drives, there are more red zone visits, there's more touchdown equity, there's more receptions. And as long as Achane's getting the opportunity share, and he is, even though he's 190 pounds, doesn't matter. If you're from the Shanahan coaching tree, you're going to feed your small, fast running backs until the wheels fall off. Until the wheels fall off for DeVon Achane. And Javonte Williams, he's starting to get going. He's starting to build some momentum. This is a buy high candidate coming off of a big top 5 week against the Saints. You might say this is the last week that you should be trading for Javonte Williams. Oh, no. That was a sign of things to come. He had bad luck with touchdowns. We had no touchdowns coming in to week 7. Now he's got 2 touchdowns on the board. More touchdowns are coming. It's a clear and obvious juicy matchup going against Carolina. Lean into it. Home game against Carolina. The Broncos are 9-point favorites. They have a smothering defense. All signs point to them feeding Javonte Williams from here on out. And he has multiple 5+ target games as well. So he's the most underrated true bell cow back in the NFL. And it's not too late. If he smashes again against Carolina, then the trade window will close. But you've got a couple days left to go get Javonte Williams and enjoy RB1 performances this week and many more to come this year.
Yeah, the usage for Javonte Williams, extremely promising. Had the huge week against New Orleans. And I think I'm with you, Matt. And it's a player that I've loved to, we will continually have conversations about dynasty rankings, redraft rankings between the two of us. with Bradley Stalder, with Billy Muzio, with Evan Ringler. And I've sort of always been on this like negative towards Javonte Williams track. And I'm willing to take the L if he can do it for a second week in a row. And I'll say one thing that's interesting was a lot of people were anticipating Audric Estime getting his big opportunity next week. I think it's very clear that Estime is only a stash, not just from the usage, but Estime comes in, fumbles in the same week that Javonte Williams gives you the massive workload. And like you said, Carolina is extremely leaky to opposing running backs. They've allowed 10 running back 1 and running back 2 weeks combined. Matt, I don't think they've played 10 games. So that's a really scary stat. Javonte Williams, I think, has another very strong week. And I'm with you. The Denver Broncos offense starting to get a little bit better. And I'll say Bo Nix has a little bit of swag. And I'll give you a little bonus. This doesn't count for our 10. So we're not going to say 11, but I'll give you a little bonus. I think Troy Franklin, a week from now, is going to be a guy that's added on the waiver wire everywhere. And it's sort of like this week I can understand fantasy managers not being aggressive adding him with all these guys like Jalen McMillan, Jawan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, just sitting there on waiver wires, Rashad Bateman on a lot of wires. But I think Troy Franklin's one where it's been back-to-back weeks of Troy Franklin with double-digit PPR points. This past week, he had a career high in catches, a career high in targets. We know the locker room narrative in Denver, where Troy Franklin and Bo Nix were extremely successful playing with one another for the Oregon Ducks. So for me, it's like Troy Franklin, I think, has another strong week. I think Matt and I are just really bullish on this Denver Broncos team. Their defense is an absolute machine, Matt, and the offense is starting to pick up a little bit. They're a really fun team. I think it's easy to pile on Sean Payton, but this Denver Broncos team is really been one of the pleasant surprises of the season. I think they steamroll once again. And
the
for
prediction
me,
is 2 top 3 performances consecutively in fantasy football at the position by Javonte Williams.
I love that one, Matt. I love that. And for me, I'll go on the opposite spectrum of the running back production. I am very worried about James Cook. And this is one I'll give a little hat tip to the Podfather. I was more bullish on James Cook this season than you were. I'm worried about Ray Davis. And I'm worried about also, it's not just Ray Davis. So you have 2 factors here for James Cook. James Cook, he played through the turf toe, showed some toughness there, but he's dealing with a toe injury. Whether it's the injury or whether it's Ray Davis coming on, that we'll never know. We're not in the coach's room. But Ray Davis, even in a game where James Cook played, Ray Davis saw more work as a receiver, and Ray Davis managed to outscore James Cook for the first time this season when they're both fully healthy in a game. And James Cook, Matt, he had 9.2 points this week, really has become sort of a purgatory player. He did give you the touchdown, but it's sort of like we can't rely on that every week. So the guy goes from giving you a 28-pointer and a 19-pointer in weeks 2 and week 3, and it's sort of been a couple of ugly games bracketing a really strong performance in week 5 against Houston. Like you said, when it comes to James Cook, he is a threat on the big plays, and that's something we can't really manage to predict week in, week out. So it makes him a little bit of a frustrating player to start week in, week out. Right now, he's running back 14. I think he is a sell high, even coming off of a week where he didn't really smash, because I don't think we're going to see another week like week 2 again if Ray Davis is going to work in. The other factor we have, Matt, is that last week Josh Allen had the most pass attempts he's had in any single game this season, and that coincided with Amari Cooper's first game as a Buffalo Bill. And Amari Cooper only played 17 snaps, but we did see Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir both play well, Ray Davis working in. There's more touch competition for James Cook. Earlier in the year, they just didn't seem to know what they were doing. It was a lot of running back. The inclusion of Amari Cooper has sort of made this a balanced offense. Josh Allen is playing fantastic. He has 15 combined touchdowns, 0 interceptions. But Cooper, to me, moves into offensive focal point level. James Cook takes a step back as maybe the second option, and a second option you can't fully trust because of Ray Davis. I'm worried about this one. I'll say that James Cook finishes outside of RB20. Maybe he finishes as a high-end RB2 or low-end RB2. Maybe he's a high-end RB3, but I think it's a downward trajectory. RB14 right now in points per game he will finish lower than this for the rest of the season.
All right, let's hot takerize this point, okay? James Cook finishes outside the top 25 fantasy running backs this year for one reason. He's an inferior receiver to Ray Davis. If you're going to be a 200-pound slasher, you need to be able to catch the ball out of the backfield. That's not a strength of his. In that way, he's Tevin Coleman. Like this is Tevin Coleman all over again. We're going to have some big splashy slasher back weeks, but you're not going to get consistent production out of James Cook ever again. I think we saw the moment. A lot of running backs have their moment. Tevin Coleman had a moment in Atlanta. James Cook had his moment, and that moment has passed. There is a wide receiver who is having a moment this year, and it's just going to be one continuous moment for the next 10 years. We talked about Jalen McMillan and what could have been, right, had he been healthy, right? What if Rome Odunze wasn't on Washington and he had more of that offense to himself? How much would scouts have noticed him, appreciated him? Well, think about Brian Thomas having to share a field with Malik Neighbors. He still put up a 75+% catch rate at LSU last year, still put up 17 touchdowns. And then he goes to the combine and he's like, well, let me show you what I can do at the combine. I'll run a 4.33 with a 98th percentile catch radius on playerprofiler.com. And these are the types of receivers we don't see much anymore. These true, proper alpha receivers that stand 6'3", with the 80th percentile burst. They can win on the inside, win on the outside, win all over the field. He is a throwback receiver who is also the quintessential modern-day receiver, where, okay, wow, this guy's got the size, but 20 years ago, that guy was more of a plodding clasher on the outside, more of like a Brandon Marshall, runs a 4.55. Imagine fast Brandon Marshall. That's what we're looking at with Brian Thomas. Brian Thomas is arguably the most exciting young wide receiver in the sport. He's right there with Malik Neighbors, and you look at their production profiles, and they're very similar. He's already better than Marvin Harrison. So if we redrafted today, you would be drafting Brian Thomas over Marvin Harrison. I think even the NFL would have to take another look at Brian Thomas and go, actually, you know what? This guy, his father didn't play in the NFL, but he's better than that guy whose dad did play.
A shout out to your cousin who coaches LSU, Brian Kelly.
Yes. For
managing to go 10. Not a lot of people knew that. That's Matt Kelly's first cousin, Brian Kelly, manages to go only 10-3 with Jaden Daniels, Brian Thomas, and Malik Neighbors. I think Matt and I, we could have gone 11-2 with that team. We could have shown up and won 11 games with that team.
Shameful. So he gets the Notre Dame job because his last name's Kelly, which is the Irish last name. So then he parlays this Notre Dame job into an LSU job, and he does the absolute bare minimum. So he should be ashamed of himself. Brian Thomas, on the other hand, he needs to give himself a round of applause. I'm just shaking with anticipation thinking about Brian Thomas this week. He goes over 30 fantasy points, and he is the wide receiver one in fantasy this week. Brian Thomas, lock it in.
I love it. And Matt, the first week we did this bold predictions video that we're dropping every single week here at Player Profiler YouTube. And make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you're just joining us first. Matt and I are dropping videos like this all week long, as well as our podcasts. Make sure you're hitting the like button. Make sure you're subscribing to Player Profiler YouTube. But Matt, first week we did this, I said Brian Thomas will be a first-round pick in 2025, and we got a little pushback there. People didn't really love that sort of enthusiasm. But you say fast Brandon Marshall. I say peak Josh Gordon on the field, part 2. So we're both in lockstep with these like fantasy breakers, these true proper alphas that were able to just dominate fantasy football. That's where we're at with Brian Thomas. Sky is the limit with him. This year, there's been like 3 must-see TV quarterbacks. Josh Allen is there. Maybe I'll say 4 because you can't ever really miss a Josh Allen game. But the 3 this year have been Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, and then Jordan Love. And Jordan Love, now with Baker Mayfield losing the 2 wide receivers with Chris Godwin for the season, I think the question is not if, but when Jordan Love takes over in terms of leading the NFL in passing touchdowns, despite playing 2 fewer games than Mayfield. Jordan Love is averaging 3 touchdown passes per game. He's had some interceptions, but he's making up for it with incredible production. The guy has an absolute cannon. He's making some throws that few quarterbacks in the NFL even attempt. He's got a gunslinger mentality. He's got weapons across the board, and they're fully healthy. And this week, he goes up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. One thing Jordan Love has never done is pass for 5 touchdowns in a game. He broke through with 4 this year. He never did that last year. He's had 3 passing touchdowns in a game many times over. But this week, he gives you a 5 touchdown game. This is the player you want in your lineup in DFS. Matt Kelly, which Green Bay Packer wide receiver roulette are we going to throw in with him? Is it War Daddy Jaden Reed this week, or you got somebody else you want to throw in there?
I'm going back to Jaden Reed, and that's talk about DFS stacks. You have the Love Reed stacks with Brian Thomas on the run back.
Love it.
Right?
I love it.
You've got a touchdown by Love, fueling by a touchdown by Thomas, fueled by a touchdown by Love, touchdown by Thomas, back and forth, shootout. 50-point total already projected for that game. It's going to go over, and Jacksonville's going to have some garbage time to deal with trying to come back from getting absolutely flamed by Jordan Love, and that's how we're going to get the wide receiver 1 week for Brian Thomas. For Theo Gremminger, I'm the Podfather. Like, subscribe, and we'll be back next week. Thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.